Hi everyone, today I invited Kiran once again after the presentation that we had done probably about a year ago. They got a lot of really great traction. I know many of you have tried Megas probiotics, you get amazing results on that. And so I want to talk a little bit more today. Kiran told me that there is something he wants to talk about, which is a microbial endocrinology. So basically how the microbiome affects our hormones, right? And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. So I invited him today to speak with us. Hey, Kiran, are you there?
Hi. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you
Everything's
very well.
clear? Okay, great.
Yes,
Great.
looks awesome. And I'm in a cabin
It
somewhere out in
looks like it.
Colorado.
I was
So
going to ask you, are you kidnapped? Are you in a holding cell? What's going on?
yeah, well, yeah, sort of. In many ways, yes. And one of those calls where I just been doing a lot of traveling. There's been a lot of changes in my life, a lot of stress, and definitely my body has been feeling it. So
Yeah.
I've been feeling a little bit under the weather. So today, no makeup, no nothing. But that's okay because it's all about you today.
Very good. Thank you. Yes, and all about your audience, really, and
Yeah.
getting them this information.
Absolutely. And when you talk, nobody's going to see me. So that's the good stuff. All right. So let's dive straight into the content. I just find it really fascinating because that's going to be a big part of my book as well.
Hmm.
And that is the whole element of how does our microbiome really impact our hormones? This is such a fascinating topic. So take it away.
Yeah. So, and it's a totally overlooked area, and when people are dealing with clear hormonal issues, everything from hyperthyroid, hypothyroid, stress, menopause, perimenopause, estrogen imbalances, all the things that women unfortunately have to deal with more often than not. And a lot of times people are focusing on the actual endocrine system within the body, the various glands, the thyroid gland, the adrenal glands, the reproductive glands. And then they're also looking at adaptogens and things that can affect hormone balancing within the body. But one thing that's largely ignored is an entire endocrine system called the microbiome. So the microbiome is now considered to be a virtual organ, if you will. It is as powerful, if not in some respects, more powerful than all your other endocrine glands put together. Your thyroid and your adrenal glands and your the female reproductive organs, all of that. Because what is clear now from all the most recent studies is that the microbiome produces and secretes virtually every hormone that the body utilizes. It also regulates the expression of these hormones, and it can inhibit or enhance the production of certain hormones within the body. So the microbiome plays a central, almost master control role in what happens to hormone balancing within your body. So if you're dealing with hormone imbalances and issues related to hormone imbalances, if you don't address the gut and the microbiome, you really don't get very far. So it becomes an extremely important thing. And we're fortunate enough that now there's a lot of studies to show, what is happening within the gut to affect hormone balancing. So I can give a few examples. For example, most people have heard that serotonin is largely produced in the gut. Right now, it's fairly well understood, and I think a lot of researchers and all that are supporting this data that almost 90% of serotonin is made in the digestive tract. And serotonin is actually a master regulator of the communication between the gut and the brain. Serotonin is known as the happy hormone, of course. It alters mood, but it also alters things like your parasympathetic system, your ability to sleep and relax, gut motility, how well your gut moves, and digestion. So a lot of times indigestion, constipation, all of these things can be a factor of low serotonin levels. And then that can then spiral into mood and sleep issues as well. Serotonin also, like I mentioned, connects the gut and the brain. So a lot of the communication between the gut and the brain is dependent on serotonin. So
Right.
things like,
Sorry, just to say here, it's like, do you see a lot of people with depression who also happen to have a lot of gut issues?
yep, it's totally correlated. And a lot of times the depression is preceded by gut issues. And it can be triggered by something as simple as a course of antibiotics. If you have some degree of predisposition for, depression, anxiety, that kind of thing, You could have a singular infection, whether it's a food poisoning, for example, that can trigger the whole cascade, or even taking a course of antibiotics for, let's say, a sinus infection. It disrupt the microbiome enough that it puts you into that downward spiral of low serotonin, low dopamine, thyroid hormone imbalances that start the whole anxiety process. To give you a few other things, so the gut produces things like dopamine. Dopamine, of course, is extremely important for reward centers of the brain, for making you feel happy. If you don't have enough dopamine production, it's very hard to get satisfaction from the things you do. So
yeah,
the
including
things,
addictions, right? A lot of addictions.
absolutely.
It's due to low dopamine levels.
Absolutely, yeah, because because it becomes a chemical dependency on that reward, right? So the body requires that chemical reward in order to motivate you to do things that make you happy. For example, going out, playing with your kids, going, shopping, whatever it may be, reading a book. These things, when they make you happy, means that dopamine is programming your body to say, okay, this is a reward behavior. Now, when you become depressed and anxious and dopamine levels go way down, it becomes very hard to get that same reward. That's why nothing sounds good, right? You just want to kind of sit at home and curl up and isolate yourself, because thinking about doing anything doesn't sound good. And that's because the dopamine levels are way down, and your gut bacteria is responsible for producing that dopamine. At the same time, the gut bacteria also produce things like norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is a stress hormone, right? It triggers the flight or fight response. Same with epinephrine. And interestingly enough, some of the bacteria that produce high levels of norepinephrine and epinephrine in the body are things like E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter. These are infective organisms within the gut. So if you have an imbalance of high levels of Salmonella or Pseudomonas or E. coli within the gut, you're getting more production of norepinephrine. You're always in that fight or flight response. And that's where this random feeling of anxiousness comes from. There's no rational thought for it, because you're not actually in any danger, right? You wake up in the morning, it's not like you're being chased by murderers or something like that, but you wake up feeling like you are. You wake up just anxious for the day. And that is, in many cases, just because you have an overgrowth of these bacteria.
What about, can we talk a little bit about hormones? What do we know about hormones like progesterone and estrogen, and how the microbiome impacts the making and the metabolism of these hormones?
Sure. Let's take estrogen as a great example. So there are basically three forms of estrogen within the body, right? You have estradiol, esterone, and estriol. And of course, they each have different potencies as an estrogenic hormone. Now, what's been shown is that the microbiome actually produces all of them. Not only does your female sex organs produce estrogen, but also the microbiome produces it. But even more fascinating than that is the microbiome, a healthy microbiome, will produce more estriol than any of the other two versions. Now, the benefit of that is estriol was often ignored in medical literature and all that, because they found that estriol was the weakest of all of the estrogen hormones, right?
And
so it has
only present in pregnant women, which now we know that's not true.
Exactly. Yep. And that was the idea, was that, okay, it goes down, the high potency estrogens go down in pregnant women, estriol comes up, but it's not true. Your estriol levels are a key to how your body is dealing with estrogen, because estriol has this great capability of being weak, meaning it doesn't induce the estrogen dependent cancer issues and imbalance issues, and yet it gives you the benefits of estrogen, like reducing menopausal symptoms, reducing vaginal dryness, and all the good things that estrogen does, reducing osteoporosis as well. Low levels of estriol are correlated with higher degrees of bone loss. And so what you need is the microbiome to produce more estriol, so that you don't end up having an elevation of estradiol or the more potent forms of estrogen. Now, the other part of it is estrobolome. Estrobolome is basically a collection of enzymes that are produced by microbes within the gut that actually break down estrogen and metabolize it so you don't build estrogen too much within your body and end up with an imbalance. Without adequate estrobolome function, you will end up in an estrogen-dependent hormonal dysfunction. And that's one of the main ways that your body clears estrogen is from the use of the microbiome.
Isn't it fascinating that a woman can have a lot of digestive issues and, even if she's eating really well, right? Because there's a lot of things like that. We eat really well, but then our gut is in a mess for whatever reason. I mean, that could be an infection that's there. It could be because of stress levels, right?
Yeah.
Because of lack of, because of antibiotics, whatever it might be the reason, but we're still eating healthy food per se. Isn't it fascinating that that could be the reason why we can be a high risk candidate for breast cancer, for example?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is something that I found it's just so fascinating that to prevent and to really manage, especially if there is history of in the family, is just to take care first and foremost of your gut.
Absolutely. Yep. Take care of the gut. And in fact, there's a lot of research going on right now in breast cancer on how to increase estriol levels, both naturally and of course artificially as well. There have been some studies on using estriol as part of hormone replacement therapy to stimulate or simulate actually what the microbiome should be doing for you in order to reduce your risk of developing estrogen-dependent cancers like breast cancer.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so really by modulating the microbiome and enhancing the production naturally of estriol through the microbiome, you can mitigate all those issues.
Thanks for sharing. And that's one of the things I talk about in my presentation on Cooking for Balance. It's just how important the estrobolome is. Can you tell us a little bit more about how does Megaspore Biotic play a role in helping the gut, the microflora, and essentially then helping us with the hormones too?
Sure. And that's a great question. So one of the things people always ask me is, okay, if we know that the microbiome produces these beneficial hormones or suppresses certain hormones that we don't want elevated, then, what are the strains that actually do that and how can we get those into the body? Well, we're not quite there yet. The science is not there. And I don't know if it'll ever be there where we can pick out single strains that do one thing and try to implant it into your gut to enhance that effect. The thing is, we all have the right strains within us. It's a matter of allowing those strains to proliferate. And the way you do that is by reconditioning the gut to favor a bigger diversity of microbes. Now, and that's where the Megaspore comes in. For example, as I mentioned, pathogenic organisms like Salmonella, Pseudomonas, and E. coli, they all will produce higher levels of norepinephrine and epinephrine, right? So those people tend to have a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, which can lead into depression as well. Now, one of the things that Megaspore, the bacteria within Megaspore does is using quorum sensing suppresses the growth of those types of organisms. So it can actually switch the balance to allow those organisms to come down and increase the growth of organisms like Argobacter. Argobacter is really important in producing estradiol, for example. But you can't go and take a supplement of Argobacter. There's no such thing. But you have it in your gut. It's suppressed by these kind of stronger, more pathogenic organisms. So the Megaspore will help recondition the gut to suppress the unfavorable microbes and allow for the regrowth of these underrepresented microbes. The other thing that it does is reduce the inflammation within the gut. And there are some good data that shows that Crohn's disease, colitis, IBD, all these things that are pathologically chronic inflammatory diseases in the gut really show significant disruption in hormone production within the microbiome. Yeah. So if you reduce inflammation, you get a better production and metabolism and regulation of hormone. We know from the latest study that I had mentioned to you earlier that we completed at University of North Texas, the Megaspore probiotic actually reduces inflammation. It seals up the gut within the intestinal tract itself so that you reduce the resulting systemic and local inflammation. So we want to do that to modulate the hormone benefits as well.
Is the
So it's
study
all about
published?
reconditioning.
Is the study published already?
It's being written up for publication right now. It'll be
Okay.
submitted for publication probably in about a month.
Okay.
And it can take anywhere from 1 to 3 months to get published at that point. But it's quite a profound study because it's the only probiotic study out there in humans that has shown a benefit of a probiotic in sealing up the gut, reducing inflammation, both in the gut and in the circulatory system.
Okay.
Because that's the other thing that affects how hormones travel within your body and communicate with your cell is systemic inflammation. Systemic inflammation really disrupts, especially neuronal hormones that are dependent on the neurons to function. So it can have some real positive benefits in terms of shifting how the microbiome works.
Can we just cover one more condition, and that is there is quite a lot of menopausal women in my group, and so I'm wondering, how does the microbiome and how does probiotics, how would they help somebody who's got who's going through menopause? So obviously low estrogen, right? Very little progesterone,
Yep.
right? Let's talk about that. If there's anything else, because I think what you've mentioned before, to me, that covers menopause as well. But if you feel like there's anything else that you want to add on, then let's do it.
Sure. And really, as you mentioned, progesterone, we didn't talk about that before. Progesterone is another hormone that's produced heavily by the microbiome. And the stimulation of progesterone production by your own glands are actually done by the microbiome as well. So the microbiome both produces it and signals to your body to produce more progesterone as well. So the microbiome reads hormone levels within the body and can trigger and turn on your own glandular systems to produce them. So that is another very important thing in looking at progesterone imbalances. Again, estradiol is one of the best things for menopausal women, and that is very dependent on the microbiome. So both of those are dependent on an increased diversity within the microbiome. Another area. Go ahead. No, I was going to jump to thyroid issues. One of the things that most people don't realize is that a low diversity of microbes is correlated with the high production of thyroid stimulating hormone. So you get hyperthyroidism, right? So they've done a bunch of these studies on animal models. For example, they take mice. They reduce mice, the total microbiome load within the gut of the mice using antibiotics and all that by 25%, 30%. And what you start to see is a huge increase in thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, if you have overproduction of T3, T4, you have, of course, anxiety, depression, jitteriness, unexplained weight loss, all the other issues that go along with it, which can, of course, then lead to hypothyroid because you overwork your thyroid. So then you end up with that fatigue syndrome. And that all comes from just reduced amounts of bacteria within the gut. Let me correlate that to some new data that we're working on with London University. A single dose of 600 milligrams of Augmentin, right? Augmentin is a broad spectrum antibiotic. A single dose reduces the gut microbiome content by 90%.
Wow.
That's a huge decrease, 90%, right? That's a single dose. So a lot of people will take the 5-day pack. You're taking 5 doses of it. So that's how impactful. And then, of course, when your microbe level comes down, your gut will bounce back. But what bounces back makes a difference, right? So what's happening is you bring down your microbial load by 90%. Automatically, you're losing a whole lot of the lactic acid producing bacteria. Now what's happening is because you're not producing lactic acid, the pH in the gut goes up. So now you've got a more alkaline gut. Now, which bacteria do better in an alkaline gut? Well, things like Clostridia, Salmonella, Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, the more pathogenic of organisms and the more unfavorable organisms. So after the antibiotic course, that tends to be what comes up and regrows. Now, when they regrow, they produce less lactic acid. So overall, you're getting this downward spiraling of alkalinizing of the gut and more favorable growth of the types of bacteria you don't want. And so that will then lead to more production of norepinephrine, epinephrine, more thyroid stimulating hormone, all these things that throw off your balance. And so what is really important is if you've ever had a course of antibiotics or you're going to or you're on it right now, becomes extremely important to take a probiotic that can suppress the regrowth of those unfavorable organisms. So one of the things that the bacillus strain does is the bacillus strains in megaspore have the capability of growing in the presence of antibiotics. And then they produce lactic acid in very high amounts. So even though you're taking an augmentin, for example, you're still keeping the gut at an acid pH, which is really important for the regrowth of the good bacteria.
So in other words, what you're saying is when somebody is on antibiotics, it's actually okay to do probiotics, megaspobiotics at that time too.
Yeah, and not only is it okay, it's absolutely important and encouraged.
Yeah.
And we just recently did a study on liver failure patients. We just finished that study. 60 patients. These patients suffer from something called hepatic encephalopathy. That is the swelling of the brain because of high blood ammonia levels, and they die very quickly from this. They are on chronic rifaximin, which is Xifaxan, a really potent antibiotic for the gut. That's the only way they can keep the ammonia levels down, is by keeping the total amount of bacteria down. But of course, that has a whole bunch of side effects. What we were able to show is even in the presence of that antibiotic, adding the spores actually reduced the blood ammonia levels by almost 40% in these patients. So they do work in the presence of antibiotics. They become really important for how your body bounces back after antibiotic therapy.
I know you're also doing a study on Hashimoto's. I don't know how much we can talk about it at this point because it's not concluded yet, right?
Right. Yeah.
When is it going to be concluded, and for us to know more about it?
I'm thinking in best case scenario, in about 6-7 months, we'll have more and more data rolling through. We're just now in the process of getting the study kind of initiated and started and all that. But I can talk about the reason why we decided to start the study. And the reason why is because we started getting a lot of case reports from a lot of doctors that we work with. We work with roughly 7,000-8,000 doctors on a regular basis on Hashimoto's patients, to a point where they're seeing in a few months the Hashimoto's, the thyroid antibodies going away to a point of being undetected. One of the biggest problems with Hashimoto's is all the comorbidities that people suffer from, right? The thyroid portion is one of it, but of course, all the other symptoms that people deal with that really affects quality of life is the biggest impact of the disease. And seeing the huge changes in those symptomologies, things like the fatigue, the brain fog, the depression, the anxiety, all of those things being improved quite significantly after about 2-3 months on the product in a noticeable way. So because of all that feedback, we decided, okay, it makes sense to invest in a larger scale study on Hashimoto's itself, and that's why we initiated the study. So we feel really good about it. We feel that we're going to see some really positive things in the study, and it'll be the first probiotic study on Hashimoto's that we know of.
Awesome. So definitely when it's out, we're going to do another video and share the results. And because there's so many women who have Hashimoto's, and my antibodies are still elevated. Like I'm at 66.
Oh, are you? Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Even though I used to be like close to 2000. So, you know, it's
wow.
an improvement to 2000 down to 66. But
yeah, it's huge.
I would love to see them going down even further. Awesome. Well, Victor, this was, as always.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And there's a couple of reference studies I'm going to ask you for, and I'm going to post the links down below. And for those of you who want to give Megaspobiotics a try, and there's going to be a link below this video. But also, there's always a lot of questions we get about how do I use it, when do I use it, and all that. And so the FAQs are going to be down below the video as well, so we don't have to talk about it on this call here. Awesome. Thank you so much, as always.
You're welcome. Thank you for letting me do this. I think this is such an important topic that women really need to understand, so they don't ignore an entire system of the body that is really the master regulator of hormones. So really take care of your gut, improve the diversity. That's really the key.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.